Okay, so last time our heroes, Gary, Strife, Vart, and Grultz, were attempting to capture the Lady of Eyes and Shadow. Unfortunately, she managed to escape, and the group of Solars, not knowing what else to do, decided to head back to Amy. Amy being their manse, which they have discovered is able to teleport them around creation. When they returned to the manse, they found that once again Amy had teleported without any kind of command. When they looked outside, they just saw nothing but fog and mist. And having had a series of long nights, combat, and emotional trying times, decided, yeah, what the hell, we don't care what's outside, let's just take a rest. Right. The following morning, after they were well recovered, and they had another look outside, they found that still pretty misty. But they went, well, why not, let's just explore and see what's around. So they exited. They soon discerned, due to the heightened senses of both Gary and Strife, that they were in fact in a cave. And when they moved and made sound, it triggered these strange crystalline um, structures within the cave to vibrate a brilliant color and resonate with a beautiful harmonic sound, which then would bounce around the cave, hitting another such crystal and trigger a repeated episode, which resulted in something almost music like. This really piqued Vart's interest, and he was sort of wanting to investigate whether this was a natural occurrence or if it was a man-made thing. However, as it didn't seem to be something particularly pressing, the group sort of talked him into continuing on, and they left the cave. They found that for whatever reason, the mists seemed to be hanging around and just lingering really unnaturally. And for whatever reason, this didn't really seem to bother them. They were like, meh, missed. And they just continued on what appeared to be a pathway. Now, Grultz, who is a rather skilled tracker and hunter, was able to determine that the path they were actually following is somehow concealed from those coming towards the manse, but when leaving, it is self-evident. Anyway, they followed this pathway till they met another road. They came across some signs indicating the different directions you could go at the crossroads. They found that the closest settlement appeared to be a place called Northeast Spokes. They decided to head in that direction. Now, while they were on the journey that way, again, Gary, with his keen senses, was able to notice off in the distance, Gary and Strife, the oncoming of some kind of weird shimmering lights in the sky concealed in the mist. They all noticed that, in fact, but Gary, Strife were actually able to determine that it was some kind of weird, strange, mist swimming turtle. And not just one, but like a pack or a horde. I don't actually know what a group of turtles is called. And they were sort of heading in their general direction, but they seemed to be grazing on the local foliage, while they were swimming. This just seemed to be some kind of interesting little tidbit. Again, the heroes didn't really engage in that too much, although there was talk of capturing one of the turtles and trying to ride it. But they continued on, and they reached a crest of a hill, and they could hear the sounds of combat. And as they proceeded down, they were able to see a large, well, not a large, but a short, but rather buff, muscular man who was shouting at a group of soldiers who had surrounded him. The heroes recognized the armor and the uniform of these soldiers as belonging to the Asulta army, Strife's sworn enemy, a man causing great turmoil in the Hundred Kingdoms as he appears to be waging a massive war across all the nations. The father of the man who killed Grultz's parents and family, and a general antagonist to Gary's perception of the way reality should be. Vart doesn't appear to have any direct connection to him, however, due to his compassion for his friends, takes great pains in the existence of this organization, this nation, and their attempts to dominate the region. The man in question seemed to refer to himself as Boric the Bear, and was shouting challenges at a large group of soldiers who were attacking him with spears, shields, bows, and arrows. He was clearly not winning, but he was obviously holding his own fairly well, given that it was one man versus a small unit of soldiers. Before the heroes could go rushing down to his aid, which they determined they would do, Vart just said, "Hey guys, do you mind if we just have a moment? I think I can just handle this by myself." And they're like, "Yeah, sure, no worries." And they gave him a couple of seconds. The next thing, he's swirling his hands around, there's mystic energies flowing, and giant tentacles of magma erupt from the earth and just wipe out the soldiers in one fell swoop. Boric, having witnessed all this happen, proceeds to march towards the heroes and challenges them to a fight, basically saying, "Look, if you come on, bring it on, I'll take you all on, I don't care." And then, obviously somewhat weakened, stumbles, he's breathing very heavily. They manage to talk their way into his good graces, and Vart determines that he's actually been poisoned. The arrow sticking out of his leg was laced with a poison, and it's it's attempting to knock him unconscious, basically. Boric manages to push through with the assistance of the heroes. They discover that he's basically muscle for hire, and he was working for a group of traders who are known to dabble in the mystical arts and aren't exactly the most trustworthy group. He was kind of felt betrayed, as they just took off when the soldiers showed up and left him by himself. And now he's left looking for additional work. And the group said, "Why don't you just come along with us? We're not going to pay you for work, but the way we're going, you might be able to actually find some work anyway." He's like, "Oh, okay, cool, no worries." So off they went. They arrive at Northeast Spokes. The strange mist is still hanging around. It's in the village as well. It's been the whole way along the journey. It's been kind of odd, but the group haven't really engaged in that at all. And then following, when they arrive, they immediately are encountered with this strange combination of wailing and laughter coming from one of the buildings in the town. Now, the town is covered in this mist, so it's not the easiest to discern where everything is. The ground is wet and sloppy, and there's very little sound. Basically, none of the buildings have lights on in them. You can't see smoke or fire or any kind of lanterns or anything. And it has this creepy, eerie feel. The heroes, the Solars, decide that they're not going to engage with the creepy sounds. They're like, "We don't need to be involved in that. It's obviously some kind of distraction. We don't want none of that business." And they proceed in. They come across an area where they can see in the distance, they can see actually a couple of the larger buildings more central to the town have lights on inside. They discuss it and they decide that Gary will go ahead and investigate. He reports back that one appears to be a merchant shop, another appears to be a tavern. The tavern is filled with men, mostly dressed in their formal black garbs, but there's like 1-2 guys who aren't dressed that way, and a small group of women dressed in really bright and exuberant colors. The group then proceeds to go and talk to the merchant. They try to get a little bit of information out of him. There's some shopping that went backwards and forwards, and they then discovered that the town had recently been visited by the Asulta army, and that they had since moved on, and there had been some kind of complication, some kind of confrontation, and people had lost their lives. And the women were actually at the church, as is the town custom, for the funeral, while the men were at the tavern. They went off to the church and to the funeral. They basically interrupted in the middle of the funeral rites and the wake. A little boy actually ran up and grabbed Grultz's leg, and crying and sobbing and snot and all that sort of stuff. Said thank you before his mother hurriedly pulled him back, while the villagers looked on them rather intimidated. Grultz quickly discerned, based on the conversations, that there was some fear and thanks towards him, basically because he looks identical to his brother. And what he's determined has happened is that his brother's come through. This town has had this issue with the soldiers, and his brother, being a death knight, wiped them out, basically. Not before many of the villagers or the townsfolk themselves had actually perished. And that's why there was this mass funeral taking place. Now the soldiers weren't being buried in a very ceremonious manner. They kind of had a mass grave further outside the grave of the town, which the heroes didn't investigate. They sort of gathered the knowledge that they wanted. There was a little bit of attitude towards the local priest or monk, I should say, who was like, look, either interrupt or don't interrupt. Say if you're here, say what you've come to say, or please go away and let us continue what we want to do. They found out a little bit further information. That's how they determined the whole thing with what happened with Grultz's brother, who's, as I said, he's a death knight. His name's the Reaper of Blood and Bone. They then decided to head back to the inn. They encountered all the men who were grieving, basically, and they came across the son of the burgomaster, who has asked them, who's clearly beaten up. It looks like he's got a broken nose, he's got a sling on one of his arms. Boric challenged him to a fight, which Gary got a little bit confused about who he was challenging. And then the son of the burgomaster actually asked them to help him because he wanted to take his father to the graveyard to be buried. However, he can't do it by himself, and none of the villagers will help him. They determined that was because the villagers were scared, given that the burgomaster's mansion, where the burgomaster is, has been visited nightly by zombies. And that was basically where we finished. It was a really short session. We had to shift to a different day. One of the guys had to leave early, unfortunately. But that's where we got to. We also kind of struggled a little bit because there was a little bit of a misunderstanding about what we were actually doing in this session. I thought I'd made it clear before that I was going to tell a story here specifically to try and wrap up the Reaper of Blood and Bone storyline that was going on before we moved on to the diplomatic mission that was happening. There was a misunderstanding around that. It kind of bogged things down a little bit. But once we got through that, things started to progress. But then we ran out of time and we just stopped for the night because it was a good place to finish. And hopefully next week we'll pick up there and we'll get into some adventures. We'll find out more about what's going on with the Reaper of Blood and Bone, what's happening with the Asulta army, and really, ultimately, what is Grultz going to do about his brother? I know Grultz has a great love for his brother still and doesn't want to see him die, but the Reaper of Blood and Bone is going around kidnapping village and townsfolk children and slaughtering entire populations. Not exactly the nicest guy you want to have around in that regards. I'm sure there's some mixed feelings in the group about this Death Knight or this Abyssal, and I'll be interested to see how that plays out in the social dynamic as well. Anyway, till next time, stay frosty.